motivation and you've got no self-esteem. There's a hole inside your head with no future to be seen. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Every day wake up with the same boring routine. You're content with the new wall and the same old boring scene. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go.
Hey Sam, how you doing, bud?
Hey, what's up? How's
Not
it going?
too much. Good. I'm doing good, man. How about yourself, man?
Not too bad. So, what are we doing here?
Hey, to the listener, welcome back to This Is Just a Phase. If you don't know who I am, I'm Jonathan Kent. I had a podcast on Spotify and Apple iTunes for a few years and decided to change up the format and head over to YouTube with a new co-host by the name of
Sam Sinister.
There you go. You might recognize Sam from our other podcasts, Xennial Files and You Got Dysentery. But I decided to bring him along for the ride and kind of try a new way to do This Is Just a Phase, where I get a little bit more feedback from, and opinions from, just not me, but also, somebody else being Sam. And we're going to go, back to doing interviews. And, for anybody who didn't know what This Is Just a Phase was about, it was a music, interview, and conversation podcast in the vein of the punk rock genre. Mm-hmm. It went on for about 3 and a little over 3 years before I decided to put it on hiatus for a little bit while I figured out things with the previous streaming service that I was using. And I wanted to do more of a video podcast. I wanted to do more of a kind of a looser podcast where not only do we do interviews and conversations, but also have, moments where maybe we decide to just, do episodes based on a certain topic or things that are going on in the world. Not on the political side, but just more on like kind of a scene style, you know what I mean? Like what's going on in the scene, along those lines. So I just wanted to be a little bit more looser, a little less confined to every episode kind of being the same formulaic thing. Mm-hmm. And I had a lot of feedback from people that have been on the podcast and past listeners of the podcast. And, they're along for the ride. So to anybody who is listening from the old podcast, thank you for being patient with me. Please welcome Sam to the fold. And and for any new listeners, thank you for dealing with my little intro to it. Sam, let's just get started. Let's bullshit for a little bit. This is kind of like the intro episode.
Yeah.
And anything new that you've been up to, man?
Yeah, a lot actually. So I think probably since the last time we talked. So for those that don't know, I'm I've been a singer in punk bands, probably nothing anyone's ever heard of that. Well, maybe, I don't know. I was in a band for 3 years back in the 2000s, like late 2000s, called Dead City Dealers. We had like a small following in our area, and then because people were doing a lot of these, like that was during the time where people were putting up blogs where they'd have a lot of like downloads, mostly for local or unsigned bands and stuff, or stuff that's out of print. And then like, come to find we had like a following in like other countries who thought we were going to come tour and shit. But that was never going to happen, just because of the level we were at and stuff,
And even before then, me and you had played in several bands together.
Yep.
Nothing that really lasted too long, but surprisingly, people remember us. So we played a band together called The Runs.
Yep.
And then we played in a band called The Reversatiles. Mm-hmm. And then Sam, like Sam said, he went on to do like bands like Dead City Dealers and Bob Saget and the Full House. And then I went, became a family man and you know, had a couple kids and kind of went that route. But
Like
you
you
know, and
do.
yeah, like you do. But you
Mhm.
know, of course, you know, outside of being doing the podcast, I do a label, so I still have my pulse on the music scene. But Sam, go ahead and continue, bud.
Oh, it's okay, man. So yeah, and then I moved to Cleveland from Western PA, where John and I are both from. Um, and here, I formed did a couple projects. Like one was called Shart 69, and that was more of an electronic kind of electronic hardcore punk thing. And then formed a band called Bar Trash, and I think that's where a lot of people up here know me from. Between that and for about 7 years, I was the host of a punk rock happy hour that was almost like the only franchisee of a West Coast happy hour called Angry Hour. um, yeah, and now we had a format change for that, so now it's called Rebel Rebel, and we do alternative. We still play punk and stuff, and it's me and another guy. Um, and I run a monthly event called Friday Night Ska Club, where I formed a house band with some friends and my wife, and we're called Night Club, spelled like the Specials song, like Niteklub. And you can look us up. We don't have any socials yet, but we're getting there. That's been going for a couple months. So, I mean, I just kind of feel like I need to share my credentials, you know what I mean? So people aren't like, who the fuck's this guy? Besides me and you doing a podcast for a while.
And you being my best friend and being somebody who I value, you know,
Hmm.
opinions when it comes to punk rock. You know what I mean? Like we've known each other, you know, going on 27 years.
Yeah.
So we, you know, we met at, you know, 17 years old, and
Hmm.
we both were into punk rock by then, but we were kind of in different maybe different backgrounds as far as punk, but there was a lot of bands that we had that were on common ground. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like you got me into different stuff. I got you into different stuff.
Hmm.
And we kind of just, when it comes to music, I don't think there's really anybody who I value their opinion more than you when it comes to either stuff that we align with or, you know, stuff that we defer from one another, whether it's, you know, new bands or, you know, bands that I discovered, you know what I mean, through
Hmm.
you. So to have you be a part of this podcast is really important to me because I I feel like, you know, having that extra, you know, uh, um, that extra sense of a different viewpoint to certain things that may not line directly with me. And I think it's important because you don't want somebody to be like, oh yeah, I love everything that, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you know, you come from, you know, you were big into, you know, oi music
Hmm.
and ska music and um got me into music like digital hardcore bands like Atari Teenage Riot and bands like um Rocket from the Crypt or Murder City Devils, and I kind of brought you into the world where I was kind of more into like maybe like, you know, more of the pop punk, little some of the hardcore, you know, especially like Victory hardcore I was really
Hmm.
big into. You know, and you know, some stuff that, you know, people might not consider overtly punk, but you know, bands like Husker Du,
Hmm.
Dinosaur Jr., um, you know, those kinds of bands that I was into. We really we're not yin and yang, but we're kind of like, you know, we're kind of like in or swimming together. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Like you know, there's no real juxtaposition between the two of us.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we both bring like different things to the table, but also have like, I mean, we've always had a lot of like commonalities because, like you said, when we met, sorry,
Cough break.
when yeah, when we met, I think we were both into you know, like more of like the pop punk or the like the West Coast like Epitaph kind of sound, you know. But you were
Mhm.
also, like you said, you were also in like the Victory hardcore, and that was stuff that I checked out, but I wasn't like super into it. Um, you know, and like, you know, I had the digital hardcore, you had the indie rock, which I had no friggin' clue about. You know, you got me into the Pixies.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Um, you know, and just like I think what really solidified that connection over music was you and I were both the type of people that would dig to find, you know, to discover things.
Hmm.
Um, you
Because
know,
it wasn't available like it is now. Music wasn't. You couldn't stream music like now. I mean,
right.
shit, you couldn't even download music until we were like 20.
Both of us were the type, you know, we would both go to a record store and like dig through the bargain bin where, or like the used section or whatever. I think that was partially economic, you know, but also just because we were like, hey, no one's heard of this. I wonder what it sounds like. I've never heard of it, you know, but instead of being like, I don't know what that is, we'd be like, ooh, I don't know what that is. You know what I mean?
Discovering
So
bands based on their artwork
on
or
the
based
artwork,
on, somebody name dropped them in an interview or,
yep.
that was the big thing for me is I really, was really lucky enough that my mom had, basically, for Christmas or my birthday or whatever, she would get me a subscription for a year for music magazines
Mm-hmm.
and, Rolling Stone and Spin and Hit Parader and all these different magazines. And because it was important because if you were in a Nirvana, you were getting into bands like Sonic Youth and Flipper and all these different bands, Meat Puppets and
Mm-hmm.
all these different kinds of bands. And it just set you down a rabbit hole, because, what bands on this label, you find out about Sub Pop, so you find out about all the Sub Pop bands, and then that sends you in. Same thing with the Offspring and Green Day. That's how we discovered bands because of the
Epitaph
bigger
and
bands
Lookout.
were name dropping. Yeah, like we
Yeah.
found out about Pansy Division and Mr. T Experience and the Queers because of Green Day.
Yeah. That's the thing. Like, I remember um at one point my this is gonna make sense to you because you know, so like my first wife,
It might make sense to me.
you know, my first wife, we'll call her because it's much easier than the actual title, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
yeah, so I remember one day we were talking and like I was talking about music and bands and stuff, and I'm like, oh, like the Lookout, pop punk, blah 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 blah. And she just looked at me for a second. She's like, you know, you say this stuff all the time, and I think you maybe put too much emphasis on record labels. And I'm like, I don't think I do. No, I mean, because that was a big way, like with underground music. You know, a lot of those bands would go on those labels because they were a certain style. Like there are bands that diverge from that. You know, like not every band on Lookout Records was pop punk or Ramones sounding or like 60s bubblegum sounding, you know?
Yeah, because you had stuff like Idiocracy and like, you know, different kinds of bands that were coming up at the same time.
Hmm.
Monsula, bands like that they didn't sound like Green
Yeah.
Day. They didn't sound like the Queers or Mr. T. I mean, those labels weren't based on sound.
Yeah. Um, an Epitaph too. Like there is an
Yeah,
Epitaph
same thing with
sound,
Epitaph. Yeah,
you know, but then they'd have things like, you know, the Beatsteaks or, you know,
International Noise
international, and then
Conspiracy.
later branched into like hip hop and um I don't know what they did after that. I know the last time they started adding like stuff that was sort of on the outs was like the you know, on the
They
Punkorama thing.
Yeah, they were
They'd have
doing
like
kind
hip
of like
hop.
the emo rap thing, that SoundCloud kind of rap thing, and then slowly they're
Mm,
kind of back doing like punk bands. Like they sound like the Linda Lindas and Thick and bands like that. So they're kind of, I think they're a little bit all over the place.
yeah.
But
Sorry,
you know
I
what? No, music's all over the fucking place. Punk rock, the way it is now, a lot of the younger bands, there's some that I like, there's some that I like, there's some that I like, there's some that I don't like. And the stuff that I don't like, I'm like, it's not for me.
Yeah, I get it. Sorry, I had the dog
No, it's
made her
okay.
way back in, and we saw how that went with take one.
Yeah, exactly. But no, what I was just saying was, you know what, there's a lot of the newer stuff that's it's not for me, and I'm not going to sit here and bitch and complain about it.
Hi.
But at the same time, like, you know, if it gets some 16-year-old kid into punk, then cool,
Yeah,
you know.
I want to say, want everyone to say hello to my wife. She's in the room. I don't know if you can hear her singing the. She's trying to sneak around and not get in the way, and she's doing the Mission Impossible theme.
Da-da-da, da-da-da, da-da, bum, 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 bum,
It's
bum,
great.
bum. Hey, Tower, to be careful of those laser wires.
Well, I'm saying I'm sure everything you said over the last 2 minutes has been very poignant, but I didn't hear a fucking lick of it.
About as much drivel as you could hear from a almost 44-year-old man. So,
So yeah, I mean, I just getting back to what I was saying, you probably touched on this, but yeah, like labels were a good way to discover, bands you hadn't heard.
well, it's you know what, piggyback off of what you said about her saying, you put too much stock in the labels. I don't think putting stock. I don't think understanding labels is any different than somebody who's a movie file, who's into watching movies. Where somebody might be like, you know what, I really like the movies that Miramax makes,
Yeah.
or MGM or Sony, or and it's the same thing as if somebody's into certain books. You like certain authors, you like certain genres, you like certain,
Well, it would
you
be
might
like
like
akin to
Penguin
like the
Press.
publisher. Yeah, like
Yeah, you might like
Penguin Press.
Penguin
Yeah.
Press or Doubleday or whoever. So I don't think it's I kind of line up the whole record label as anybody who is into anything as a collector, whether it's toys or books or music or movies, it's all the same. It's just
Yeah.
different. It's just different. It's just a different format and a different view of looking at it.
Yeah.
You know, you
I
know.
think
Go ahead.
that's, unlike, a book publisher or a movie studio or whatever, I think that label heads and people, like I don't know if indie labels have like A&R people, but whatever the equivalent of that would be, these are curators. You know what I mean? I think whereas like a Hollywood studio, like maybe if you're like in like an indie production company for movies, you might have a little bit of that, but um, I mean, like something like Miramax, that's a studio that's trying to like, investing in things and then, getting their money back. You know what I mean? And trying like
Mhm.
hell to get the money.
Or maybe even like maybe instead of Miramax, maybe a good example would be like A24. People might be into like
Yeah,
A24 movies or something like that, and
right.
really like the style and direction those movies are made in.
Yeah,
Miramax was a
absolutely.
bad example, but it
No,
was
no, but that's
something to
that's
draw.
actually that was the first thing that popped in my head when you started talking about, if you're into movies. I'm like, oh, yeah, like Miramax.
Yeah,
But yeah.
fuck those guys, but
Right,
that's
now
another
we
story.
know
Yeah,
things. But
I'm the
yeah, or
Miramax of
like
the punk rock scene. No, I'm joking. I'm joking.
it's like okay, so like under Miramax, let's say more like View Askew, you
hmm
know, or even though that's, like one guy and then maybe put out a couple of his friends' movies, but or two guys.
Or like I said, like A24,
Right.
or those things that, yes, they're maybe under a bigger umbrella and they do have a lot of people, but you know what? Not every, there's labels like Epitaph and Fat Wreck and Lookout who are kind of like the upper echelon labels.
Yeah.
But then below them, you got smaller labels and
Right.
smaller labels and smaller labels, and you get down to like the level where I'm at with the label that I co-own.
Yeah.
But I mean, there is different tiers, but I mean, I don't see much difference between somebody who's into collecting Lookout record stuff or any different than somebody who collects stuff off of like
Be like Troma.
Homestead or like Stardom or something like that.
Yeah.
Like,
Or like,
it's like that.
someone that's like really into Troma movies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think it would
Mm-hmm.
be more like that, you know. There's like you're saying, there's a different level. So like Miramax would be like the production and like release, like the
Yeah. They would be like the Epitaph.
distribution, but
Yeah.
or when Epitaph was like getting distributed by Warner Brothers, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
think if you look at like the, like you said, A24, we're talking about Troma, which would probably be like the closest thing. It's
Yeah.
more
Or
like,
A24, then Trauma. Trauma would be like maybe at the level where you're
yeah,
getting into like smaller labels like Clearview and Indecision and
yeah,
like Homestead, like those smaller labels, whereas maybe like A24 might be like Hopeless and Fearless and
hmm
you know what I mean, those kind of like
yeah,
mid-tier levels,
yeah.
you
I just
know.
think there's also different like purposes to each of those things. You know what I mean? Like when you have a label that is actually like paying for the recording and shit like that, like you're
Mm-hmm.
using a studio to record the same way that like Kevin Smith was using the Miramax studio lot to record,
Mm-hmm.
to like produce or direct, film the, scenes in like Jay and Silent Bob or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, I think there's different purposes and stuff. It's not just like the size or notoriety. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But I don't know.
exactly.
I think we're getting off topic a little bit.
I don't necessarily think we're getting off topic, but I don't know how much. I mean, I'm sure the listener or now the watcher of this, a lot of them are probably following exactly what we're talking about. You know what I mean? I don't think we're really getting obscure in our talking or anything.
No, not at all.
Um, but one thing I do want to we could get off topic because I do have a question for you.
Okay.
Um, what would you like to see happen with this podcast moving forward? Like, what are some of your goals?
Um, I don't know. I think you know, not that okay, so let me put it like this, like not that anything that you or any other podcaster is like lacking or doing wrong or anything, but I think um and again, for anyone that's watched our other podcasts, I am not a podcast guy. Like I don't listen to or watch podcasts a lot,
He's
but
listened to like three of the original
no, I've listened to more
run
like
of
10.
podcasts.
I've listened to like 10 episodes of
10 of
yours versus
102. My
out of
God, thank you
102.
so
Right.
much.
And then like, um what's that really popular ska one? Um
I don't know.
In Defense of Ska, I've listened to like 2 episodes,
Oh,
you
okay.
know. But like I've never listened to like things that I'm interested in. Like I've never listened to Grew Up a Punk or whatever it's called, you know. um but anyway, one thing I think I can bring to the table here is I used to be a zine interviewer, I mean, I had my own zine. It wasn't like I worked for Maximum Rock and Roll or anything like that. But um, one thing that I would do is just ask zany off the wall questions that come out of left field, you know?
Yeah.
Like we'll be sitting there talking about like, the latest tour or whatever. And I'll be like, so if you were, a superhero, which superhero would you want to fight? Just something weird like that. Like
And
like
I
like
think that's important. And I think that's important and why I wanted you to do the podcast with me. Because I do want to take this podcast in a little bit more of an open style of doing things. You know what I mean? Because it's hard for anybody who's listening. Um, it's really hard to make a podcast. I did
mhm,
it for a little over 3 years. I did 102 episodes. It's a lot of work, a lot of time, causes a lot of stress. But and one reason why I put the podcast on hold outside of the streaming, the change in streamer, is I wanted to kind of let myself reset, which without giving up on the idea of the podcast.
mhm,
I enjoyed the original run of those over 100 episodes, and they're still available for anybody who wants to look at. You can find all of them on Spotify. You can find the majority of them on Apple iTunes and all that.
Mhm.
But this one, I wanted to do a little bit different, where I didn't find myself getting burnt out. You
Yeah.
know, like outside of just doing interview and conversations with people who are involved in the scene, whether it's, you know, people in bands, people who own labels, people who do zines or other podcasts, et cetera, et cetera. But I I definitely just want this to be a little bit open. And not every episode is going to be the same. Not every episode is going to have the same flow. And that's okay. I just hope people that are into underground punk rock tune in and enjoy the ride, because this you know is very important to me.
Mhm.
It allowed me to move on to other ventures as well, like starting the record label that I co-own. It's a CD label called This Is Just a Record Label. Um, you know, and it allowed me to really develop a lot of friendships along the way. A lot of the people that I featured in the original run will be back on this one as well, just because I've cultivated so many friends along the way doing the podcast. I mean, shit, I went from like 400 friends to like almost 1,500 on Facebook alone, just from networking with people and you know, meeting other people along the way, whether they're other podcasters or label owners or shit people that I grew up listening to. And I was lucky enough to interview, you know, some people who were, in my opinion, um, unattainable. And through the power of social media and podcasting, I mean, um, it's pretty fucking awesome. And I just want to continue to do that. And I wanted Sam along for the ride, because everything I said before about him, I don't want to give him a big head or, you know, anything like that.
No, I have a very small head.
And that's what your wife told me. My wife probably told you the same thing about me.
No.
And we also come with humor. It's just not a dry podcast. There's going to be humor. There's going to be fun. You know, we're going to make the guests feel comfortable and
Or uncomfortable.
or uncomfortable. And, you know, we're going to do it
Hopefully
from
comfortable.
the comfort of our homes.
Yeah. Touching on something you were talking about, how you know,
Touch it on me.
do-
Touching on me. Touching on you.
touching me, touching you. Anyway, what was I gonna say? You fucked me up.
You were going to touch on
Um,
something.
yeah. Oh, when you were talking about, you know, the previous iteration of the podcast, um, being stressful, you know, one thing, you know, I hope to get out of this, uh, is that, you know, with our other podcast, I was kind of like very lackadaisical and, you know, unprepared and flippant and stuff, and maybe you can rub off on me a little. You can rub off on me a
Yeah.
little bit,
Won't be the first
um,
time.
where I can be more prepared, you know, but also maybe I can take some of the stress off of this for you, where some of that attitude that I brought to the other podcast can rub off on you with this, where it's like, you know, I mean, this isn't life and death stuff. You know what I mean? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, being someone who's been in punk bands and stuff, you know, it's like there is a certain level of like, you know, throw some shit at the wall and see if it sticks. And if it doesn't, then you just go, well, whatever, you know, I'm human. And then you keep, you know, you push on.
And I think we have different strengths too. I mean, I'm definitely much. I'm very. It doesn't bother me to reach out to bands and set up interviews and set up, you know, times and those kinds of things. Kind of the stuff that makes the wheels turn. And you're much more of the creator, where it's very easy for you to create, you know, logos and how you want things to look and the aesthetic of things. And I need somebody like that, you know what I mean? And I'm sure you know, not that you're not that you're not, you know, capable of doing the things that I do. The fact of the matter is I just do it a lot, you
Yeah.
know,
Right.
between the podcast and the label and all that. Like that's what I do. I'm kind of like the co-owner, the AR guy, the, you know, collector of things for comps and stuff like that. So like I'm used to talking to people. I'm used to communicating with people. At least in the format of a podcast. Like you said, you're not a podcaster, but you bring something different to it, you know, that I think is important for this reader, for this uh iteration of the podcast.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
So,
yeah.
yeah. Let's see where we at for time. We got 7 minutes left.
Okay. But I think we're pretty good. I think this is a good introductory episode for it. And um you know, like maybe get it out maybe either later in the week or next week.
Yeah.
And
And then we'll figure
hopefully,
out.
you know, like I'll flag everywhere like I always do. And you know, for the viewer, you can follow us on all the old platforms that the original podcast was on Facebook. You can find us at This Is Just a Phase. It's a Facebook group. You'll be able to follow us on Instagram at I believe it's TIJAP podcast. We're also on Twitter. Same one of those two handles you can find us on. And then I think at some point I'm going to make a Blue Sky um, account for the or for the podcast and for the podcast and the label. I'm just going to kind of envelope it together. But that's where you'll be able to find us. And if you're into cool punk rock, you can go ahead and check out the aforementioned label. This is just a record label.bandcamp.com. New releases, that was the 80s, 20 song comp of punk bands covering classic 80s songs, as well as releases by bands like Trash Mammals, Broken Barcodes, The Shanks, um, The Distractions, and TV Thief, amongst others. So, anything you want to plug before we go?
I don't know when this is gonna, if this isn't gonna come out before the show probably, but um I don't know, check out look up Nightclub CLE. Um we are on Blue Sky. Well, I'm on Blue Sky. So if you look up Sam Sinister CLE on Blue Sky, you'll see posts about my band Nightclub and Friday Night Ska Club, the event. And I'm going to be starting a new weekly punk night at the new Foundry Concert Club in Old Brooklyn, part of Cleveland, called Personality Crisis. Um, and yeah, check us out at the Winchester every Friday at Rebel Rebel.
And if you see me around the Youngstown area of Ohio where I live, um, give me a shout, give me some love, give me a big hug. You know, maybe we can touch tips.
Yeah.
Just hit me up on the street. If you want to hit me up directly, you can do so over on all those socials, as well as my personal Facebook at Jonathan Kent. Just look for the this is just a record label logo on in the little circle icon thing. But with that being said, Sam, thanks so much for doing this with me, and on to the next phase, like phase 2, we'll call it.
Yeah. Phase 2 of This Is Just a Phase.
Yep, for sure, man. Well, thank you so much, man. You have a wonderful day, brother.
You too, man.
Hey, I'll talk to you later on, man.
All right.
Peace.